Hi, I'm Stephanie Burgis. I'm going to be reading you a little bit of my short story Blue Joe, which was just published in issue number 10 of Shimmer magazine. Blue Joe is a very personal story for me. I wrote it in memory of my grandfather, Emil Bauman, and I worked a lot of our family history into the story, even though the actual events and characters are completely fictional. Like the hero of my story, my grandfather is Croatian American. His parents came over from Croatia around World War I and settled in Youngstown, Ohio. Like the hero of my story, my grandfather and his brothers started a family band, which used to play in the nightclubs in Youngstown. And like the hero of my story, my grandfather and all of his brothers ended up in World War II. Now I'm going to read you just the opening scene of my story, Blue Joe. Joseph Anton Miklovich, Blue Joe, was 21 years old and playing the sax in a nightclub in Youngstown, Ohio, when he met his father for the first time. Joe was on stage with his family band, Carl on keyboard, hunched and intense, Nico on drums, grinning his lopsided dreamer's grin, and Ivan, as smooth and polished as a Croatian Clark Gable, playing his shining trumpet like a peal up to heaven. Smoke swirled across the tables, obscuring the waitresses in their Betty Boop outfits and the customers in their sharp suits with dyed blondes on their arms. Ivan had hooked up with the son of a local mob boss to pull this job, and the rest of the brothers knew how lucky they were to get it. Ivan had big plans, and Joe was happy to go along with them. Joe soared into his lead break, and when he emerged, sweaty and victorious, he met the fierce gaze of a hawk-nosed man at the back of the room through all the smoke and the darkness. Time froze around them, and the music stopped. "You don't look much like your mother," the man said, as he crossed the room. He wore a long black coat from a different era, and it flapped around him like the wings of a crow. Joe squinted through the smoke, watching the man sidestep frozen Betty Boops and customers' arms flung out mid-gesture. Joe's brothers were still as statues on the stage around him, and Joe thought he probably ought to be scared. "Everyone always said I took after her," he said, mildly. "All they meant was, you don't look like that lump she married." The man reached the stage and jumped up onto it as easily as if it were only an inch high instead of 4 feet from the ground. "You take after me." Joe looked the man up and down, and knew it to be true. They shared the same crazy golden eyes, the same jet-black hair, though Joe's was slicked back in fashionable lines, and the same great hook nose about which Joe's brothers had always teased him. He turned to look back at his brothers now, and the man before him shook his head. "No, they're not mine. Your mother and I had parted ways by then, but I told her I'd come for you to raise you right when I was ready." "And you waited till now?" Joe laughed, despite the shock. "You left it a bit late, don't you think?" "It took time to make my way over. Do you remember the journey you took?" Joe shook his head. "I was only a baby when we came to the States." "Well, I took a longer route. It's harder to leave the old country. For some." Some? Joe didn't know exactly what the man meant, but he didn't care to ask either, not with the rest of the nightclub frozen around them like stills in a newsreel. Whatever power this man had, it was obviously more than the local mob, and that was enough to scare anyone with sense. "I'm here now," the man said, "and it's more than time. Your mother hid you too well." He fixed Joe in his hawk-like gaze. "Time to go." "Hey, I'm not going anywhere." Joe stepped backward, crashing into Carl's keyboard. "I've got family." "I'm your family." Joe drew strength from his brother's presence around them, even though they couldn't move. "I'm in a band. We're going places. We might even break into Hollywood if we're lucky." His father snorted. "You're as stupid as your stepfather if you really think that." "I'm with my brothers," Joe said. "We're a team." He squared his jaw. "We can have a beer sometime and talk if you like, but it's too late for you to act like a real father now." "You'll change your mind," his father said. Anger flared deep and raw in his gaze. "I promise you, you'll change your mind." Black, choking smoke erupted around him, making Joe tear up. He bent over, coughing, and the music started up around him again as if it had never stopped. A black feather lay on the stage next to Joe's polished shoes. 3 days later, his draft papers arrived. 6 days later, Joe shipped out to training camp, carrying his saxophone by his side, but leaving his brothers behind. You can read the rest of the story in Shimmer magazine. Thank you very much.